Close your eyes, and let's drift back to the loop you never knew you were in. Not a real place, not a real time, but a psychological orbit. Round and round you go, dragged behind the horse of your own past, while the rider, your brain, pretends it's already moved on. This is the trauma loop. And no, it's not just a metaphor. It's a clinical riddle that science still struggles to fully unravel. In the quiet corners of your memory, you think of something unpleasant, a moment you'd rather not return to. But the moment doesn't fade. It clings, sharp around the edges. You smell what you smelled back then. You feel the pressure in your chest. Your pupils dilate. A cough, a footstep, the scrape of a door. It all comes back, louder than ever. You are no longer remembering the moment. You are inside it, again, fully. And your body? It's convinced the danger is real, right here, right now. Here's the strange part. The trauma loop doesn't always need a trigger. Sometimes the brain cues itself, like an overprotective security system that rings alarms because it remembers ringing alarms. Your heart rate spikes for no reason. A pit forms in your gut. Your palms go clammy. You don't recall the original event, but your body sure does. Scientists still argue whether trauma lives more in the mind or the nervous system, but most agree. It bypasses logic entirely. It doesn't knock on the front door. It slips in through the walls. There's a theory, yes, a fringe one. The trauma, unresolved, tries to complete itself. It's like your psyche is stuck on an unsaved draft. So it keeps replaying, editing, looping, hoping for a better ending. But every replay becomes a re-injury. You're not healing. You're etching the groove deeper. And here's the cruel irony. Your brain thinks it's helping. It flags the trauma as a survival priority. So it bookmarks it. And it loops you through it not to torture you. Though, oof, it really nails that part. But to make sure you never forget what almost broke you. You might not even notice. You may call it being on edge, burnt out, or having a short fuse. But what you're really experiencing is the echo of an old siren. And like a siren, it only gets louder when ignored. Fun twist? Studies on rats show that stress from trauma can be passed through generations. No experience necessary, just DNA. So you may be looping through a memory that isn't even yours. Could be your grandmother's panic, your great-grandfather's dread. You're just the unlucky endpoint of their psychological relay. And there you lie, curled under your blanket, thinking you're processing your day, when really, you're reliving an ancient alarm. Not because you remember it, but because your brain insists. It never ended. Sleep tight. But before we drift further into the rabbit hole, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're falling asleep from. You're brushing your teeth, you glance in the mirror, and for a fraction of a second your reflection doesn't quite follow. You blink, it blinks later. You tilt your head, it pauses, then matches. A glitch? A trick of light? Or something else? Something standing perfectly still behind the glass, learning to mimic you better every day. Welcome to the Doppelgänger Effect. Not the folklore version, where evil twins wander the woods with lanterns and malice. No. This one lives in psychology, in perception, in the very strange truth that your own face can sometimes feel, not yours. There's a name for that chill down your spine. Autoscopic hallucination. It's when your brain conjures a visual double of you, often from the corner of your eye, moving independently or standing nearby. In some cases, People see themselves from outside their own body, watching like a ghost with nowhere to go. These aren't just dreams. They've been documented in patients with epilepsy, migraines, trauma, and even intense meditation states. But even more disconcerting than seeing yourself is not recognizing yourself. There's a condition called mirror self-misidentification, where individuals believe the reflection they're seeing is someone else entirely, not a stranger, not a monster, just not them. It's your face, but your brain refuses to claim it. Scientists still argue whether this is caused more by visual misprocessing or a deeper identity fracture. But either way, it's unsettling. Let's throw in a real case to keep things cozy tonight. A woman in her 60s began screaming every time she passed a mirror. She believed a different woman was stalking her, an old stranger who lived in the house and copied her every move. That woman? Her reflection. She even began talking to it, trying to convince the stranger to leave. Now here's where it gets even more dreamlike. There's a neurological region in your brain, right around the temporoparietal junction, that's been implicated in these doppelganger experiences. Damage, seizures, or even overstimulation in that area can mess with your sense of where you end and the world begins. One wrong flicker of electricity, and suddenly you're two people at once. Or worse, one person being observed by a version of yourself that knows more than you do. Creepier still, some psychologists believe that our brains naturally simulate alternate versions of ourselves during deep introspection, so we can self-correct our behavior by imagining what we would do, which means, technically, you are never alone. You're always being monitored by hypothetical yous, mirror you, thought you, dream you. And if you've ever caught your reflection looking slightly off, too still, too knowing, maybe blinking wrong, you're not broken. You're just noticing the lag between your perception and your reality, between who you are and who you think you are. Let's not even get into the fringe researchers who wonder if the doppelganger effect is a psychological echo from some older survival instinct, something that made us fear sameness because predators evolved mimicry. So now, when you see something too close to you, but not quite right, your brain flips out. It wants you to run, or close your eyes, or smash the mirror. But you won't. You'll stare. You always do. You hug your mother. She smiles, says your name, even tells that same story she's told a dozen times about the time you fell asleep in your cereal bowl. But tonight, something's off. Her face is just a little too symmetrical. Her eyes don't quite match her tone. And suddenly, with ice dripping down your spine, you realize that is not your mother. This is Capgras Delusion, named after the French psychiatrist who first documented it. This rare and disquieting condition convinces people that someone close to them, usually a spouse, parent, or child, has been replaced by an identical imposter, not a stranger in disguise, an exact copy, down to the moles and voice and catchphrases, yet utterly, absolutely not the real person. Now pause and imagine what it feels like to live this. Your partner brings you coffee, as always. They speak the way they always do. But their presence feels wrong, hollow, rehearsed. You become convinced they are part of a conspiracy, that the real version is missing, maybe taken, maybe dead, maybe watching you from somewhere else. It's not psychosis in the usual sense. In fact, Capgras patients are often quite lucid, fully functional, charming, articulate. Except for the one detail they refuse to budge on. The person they love is not who they claim to be. Mainstream psychology chalks it up to a disconnection between the visual recognition system and the emotional memory center. In other words, your brain sees a familiar face, but doesn't generate the warm sense of recognition it's supposed to. So instead of thinking, something's off with how I feel today, the mind goes, this must be a fake, an actor, a mask. It's such a clean narrative, your brain prefers it to the confusing blur of reality. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. There are recorded cases of people developing Capgras Delusion only for pets. One man adored his golden retriever, until one morning he was certain that someone had swapped out his beloved dog with an identical clone. Same bark, same wag. But according to him, the soul was gone. Some researchers have pushed a little further into the dreamlike abyss of this condition, wondering whether Capgras reveals more than it conceals. What if it's not a failure of recognition, but a glimpse into how precariously we hold the idea of identity? How much of your knowing someone is just the ritual comfort of familiarity? You don't really know the inner world of anyone, do you? You just know the signs. A smile, a phrase, a habit. But if they did all those same things tomorrow, with no internal soul behind them, would you even know? Scientists still debate whether Capgras is purely neurological, or whether a delusional framework has to fill in the emotional void. What's especially disturbing is that the condition almost never extends to voices on the phone. Only visual presence triggers the doubt. You could talk to your real husband on a call, then hang up and look across the table at the exact same man and feel horror crawling up your neck. So maybe, tonight, think twice before you dismiss that eerie instinct that something's not quite right. You don't have Capgras. Probably. There's a point where you stop trying. Not because you're lazy, not because the task is impossible, but because you've learned, deep down in the bone marrow of your psyche, that effort changes nothing. Welcome to learned helplessness, the saddest magic trick your brain knows. It begins with a shock, or a locked door, or a hand that slaps away every attempt to stand up. You try again, and eventually you don't. Your brain rewires, not to escape, but to expect defeat. It all started with dogs. In the 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman ran what would now be considered a profoundly unethical experiment. Dogs were placed in a box with a mild but inescapable electric flaw. No matter what they did, the shock came. And after enough repetitions, something happened. They stopped trying to escape, even after the shock became avoidable. The door was open. Freedom was right there. But the dogs stayed curled on the floor, quietly suffering, because they had learned that their actions meant nothing. It doesn't stop with dogs. Human brains, even better at internalizing futility. Think of the student who never speaks in class because they were mocked once, or the adult who won't apply for jobs because they were rejected 5 times. You try, you're hurt, and suddenly the math your brain does is cruelly simple. Trying equals pain. So it stops trying, not because you're incapable, but because you're conditioned to believe you are. Quirky detail. In a follow-up study, some dogs never developed helplessness. The ones that didn't, they had been taught, prior to the experiment, that their actions could change things. They had a history of success, and that shielded them. Think about that. Optimism, it turns out, is a form of psychological inoculation. But what's really haunting is how subtle it can be. You might not even notice it happening. A coworker always takes credit for your ideas, so you stop speaking up. A parent criticizes your creativity, so you stop drawing. Each time, a little door closes, and eventually you stop reaching for doorknobs altogether. There's an ongoing debate in psychology about whether learned helplessness is purely behavioral conditioning, or whether it ties into more fundamental questions of control, agency, and even neurochemistry. Some neuroscientists have tracked it down to the dorsal raphe nucleus, a part of the brainstem that releases serotonin. When it's overactivated by stress, it can inhibit your desire to move, explore, or resist. Even when resistance would help, you become a ghost in your own life, not chained, not broken, just taught to stay still. Now picture yourself lying in bed, under a thick, comforting blanket, but instead of warmth, imagine it's made of all your past failed efforts, every no you internalized, every locked door you never tried again. It's heavy, isn't it? But here's the twist. Learned helplessness is learned, which means it can be unlearned. Some people recover, some dogs jump again, some prisoners sing. The trick is simple but infuriating. You have to act as if your effort matters before there's any proof that it does. And that's what makes it so hard. You're not just pushing a rock uphill. You're doing it without knowing if the hill even ends. Still, it's better than lying on the floor. You're brushing your teeth when the thought crosses your mind. You don't exist. Not in a philosophical way, not metaphorical, just plain literal. You are dead. You have no blood, no organs. Your body is an empty puppet. And somehow, that thought doesn't scare you. It feels true. Welcome to Cotard's delusion, also called walking corpse syndrome. It's one of the most surreal psychological conditions ever documented, a disorder where people are entirely convinced that they are dead, rotting, or entirely non-existent. Imagine trying to explain that to your doctor. Hi, yes, I'm here because I'm a corpse. And yet, patients with Cotards have done exactly that. One woman in the 1990s insisted she was a skeleton in human clothes. Another man believed his brain had liquefied and run out his ears. A third stopped eating entirely because he claimed, quite sensibly from his point of view, that dead people don't need food. The condition was first identified in 1880 by Jules Cotard, a French neurologist, who described a patient convinced she was eternally damned and incapable of dying because she was already dead. She denied the existence of her body parts, her soul, and even God. Not because she was rebellious, just because she genuinely believed it. So what's happening here? Scientists still argue whether Cotard's arises from depression, psychosis, or neurological damage, but most agree there's a strange twist in self-recognition. In some cases, it's tied to lesions in the parietal and frontal lobes, where sensory input meets personal awareness. The body continues functioning, but the system that says "this is me" goes eerily quiet. Quirky fact of the night. In one case, a man who survived a motorcycle accident woke up fully alert, but believed he had died in the crash and was now in hell. His family took him on a trip to South Africa, hoping the change of scenery would help. Instead, he concluded they had all gone to hell with him. "Makes sense," he said cheerfully. "You're dead too." But here's where it becomes more than a bizarre case study. Cotard's delusion is a cracked mirror held up to the question we all quietly tiptoe around. What does it mean to be alive? You breathe. Your heart beats. But does that prove you exist? Or is life, in some terrifying sense, just a story your brain is telling you? When you lie awake at night staring into the dark, is that you thinking? Or just echoes bouncing around a machine that's still powered on? In some philosophical circles, Cotard's has been used as a lens into questions of consciousness. If you can sincerely believe you don't exist, and your body continues to function without complaint, then who exactly is the you doing the believing? There's no clear cure for Cotards. Some patients recover through medication or therapy. Others fade slowly, refusing food and hydration because, in their minds, there's simply no point. The lights are already off, the curtain already closed, and you're lying there listening to this. Your chest rises, your toes wiggle. You think you're real, but are you sure? Someone shows you clear, undeniable proof that your favorite belief is wrong. Solid data, multiple sources, maybe even a friend you trust, speaking gently. And instead of updating your view, you clutch your belief harder. You fortify it, as if the truth is an attack and your job is to survive it. This is the backfire effect. It's the psychological paradox where confronting contradictory evidence doesn't correct your thinking. It reinforces your original opinion. You dig in, not because you're irrational, but because your brain is trying to protect its own internal consistency. Imagine your beliefs are like an old wooden house. Each board represents a fact you've chosen, a story you've repeated. And then someone walks in with a crowbar and tries to pry off one plank. Do you calmly consider it? No, you bolt the door, board the windows, set the whole porch on fire. Better to protect the shape of the house than admit it might have been built on sand. Mainstream psychology first observed this in political studies. Researchers gave people news articles that contradicted their political views with sourced corrections. Not only did most subjects not change their minds, but some became even more entrenched. The act of being corrected felt like a threat, not a favor. Why? Your identity is the real issue. Beliefs aren't just ideas. They're extensions of who you think you are. So when one's challenged, it's not that fact might be wrong, it's I might be wrong. And your brain responds to that like it would a bear attack, with adrenaline, defensiveness, and possibly mild growling. Here's your quirky twist. The effect disappears sometimes when you ask someone to explain their belief in detail. Not why they believe it, but how it works. When someone has to break down the mechanics behind their view, the illusion of certainty can wobble. Because often, we don't believe in things we understand. We believe in things we feel. But scientists still debate how universal the backfire effect truly is. Some newer studies suggest it's more common in emotionally charged topics than in neutral ones. You might let go of a mistaken idea about tomato growth, but try touching someone's beliefs about religion, justice, or pineapple on pizza, and suddenly they're building fortresses. There's even a neurological layer to this. Functional MRI scans show that when core beliefs are challenged, the amygdala lights up, the same area involved in fear and survival. So your brain treats debate like a fistfight. No wonder nobody likes losing an argument. It doesn't just feel bad, it feels dangerous. And at night, when you're lying in bed scrolling through opinions you disagree with, chuckling, rolling your eyes, you're not becoming more open-minded. You're rehearsing your defenses, cementing your certainty, smiling while your brain quietly welds shut every mental exit door. Now here's the soft horror of it all. What if some of your most cherished beliefs, the ones that make you feel smart, kind, enlightened, are wrong? And what if you're too psychologically armored to ever find out? You'll never know, because the more someone tries to tell you, the less you'll listen. There's something almost human looking at you. The face has eyes, a mouth, a voice that mimics warmth. But something about it, something you can't quite name, makes your skin crawl. Not fear, not disgust, just unease, like watching someone wear a human mask, slightly too tight. Welcome to the uncanny valley, the psychological dip where things become too close to human, and your brain flips from curiosity to dread. This is where androids, AI avatars, and deepfakes often live, just shy of being fully convincing, close enough to mimic us, far enough to unsettle us. The concept first came from robotics. In the 1970s, Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori plotted a graph showing how people responded to increasingly human-like machines. At first, more realism brought more comfort, but right before things got fully human, there was a sharp drop, a valley of revulsion, hence the name. You feel it when a wax statue stares too long, or when a CGI character moves with that slightly off rhythm. It's the silent alarm your subconscious throws when it sees something that should be real, but isn't. Scientists still debate whether the discomfort comes from evolutionary defense, like spotting corpses or disease, or from cognitive mismatch, where what you see and what you expect are too far out of sync. And here's a quirky twist. The valley isn't the same for everyone. Children, for example, often don't feel the uncanny valley until about age 7. Their threshold for weirdness is higher. Or maybe their reality has always been more elastic. Now let's tiptoe toward your reflection again, but this time in digital form. AI-generated faces have become eerily accurate. They blink, they smile, they even micro-frown. But stare just long enough and you'll spot it. The tiny pores, the too smooth skin, the gaze that tracks perfectly. A real human never does anything perfectly. There's a debate happening in design circles. Should robots and avatars try to be human or just embrace their synthetic nature? When virtual assistants had robotic voices, users treated them like tools. But when their voices became soft, emotional, even empathetic, people began to open up. And some researchers worry that if machines become too emotionally persuasive, without the burden of ethics, they'll outmatch us in manipulation. In short, the uncanny valley might not always repel. It might eventually seduce. Now here's where things blur even further. There's a condition known as face pareidolia, where the brain sees faces in random patterns. Clouds, outlets, toast. Your mind is wired to find faces. But when it finds almost faces, it panics. Because it's not just looking for features, it's looking for intentions. Are you real? Are you safe? And when the answer hovers in the middle, your body doesn't know what to do. So next time you catch yourself staring too long at a photo, or a chatbot that feels a bit too personal, or a video where the person smiles a second too late, don't panic. It's just your ancient brain whispering, "That looks like us," but it isn't. And it knows. You're doing something that doesn't quite line up with what you believe. Maybe you're preaching honesty but telling a small lie. Maybe you love animals but eat a cheeseburger. Maybe you say you don't care what people think, right before checking your reflection for the 5th time. That pinch in your chest, that mental itch. That's cognitive dissonance, your mind's version of a pulled muscle. It's the mental discomfort that happens when your beliefs and your actions don't match. And your brain hates it. It's not just awkward, it's psychologically destabilizing. You're walking around with conflicting truths, and the brain is going, "Pick one already, or I'm going to spiral." The concept comes from a 1957 experiment involving a doomsday cult. The leader predicted the world would end on a specific date. When it didn't, you'd expect followers to feel embarrassed and leave. But many strengthened their belief instead. Why? because they had already sacrificed so much: time, relationships, reputations. If the prophecy was false, then their entire identity collapsed. So they changed the narrative. They had saved the world through their faith. Belief adjusted. Dissonance resolved. Sound ridiculous? Now think about how often you tweak your logic to make life feel smoother. You say, "I didn't really want that job anyway," or "They didn't text back because they're probably busy." The discomfort isn't unbearable, but it's there. Your brain's little janitor sweeping contradictions under the rug. Scientists still argue over how much cognitive dissonance actually influences behavior long term. Some say we correct our actions, others say we rewrite our beliefs. But either way, something's got to give. Here's a quirky study to chew on while you drift off. People were asked to do a boring, repetitive task and were then paid either $1 or $20 to lie and say it was fun. Oddly, the $1 group was more likely to later report that they genuinely enjoyed the task. Why? Because the lie wasn't well paid. They couldn't justify it externally. So to reduce dissonance, they convinced themselves it wasn't a lie at all. Their brain filled in the emotional blanks like an AI trying to color a half-finished sketch. Now imagine the everyday web of little dissonances you carry. Valuing health while skipping sleep. Wanting peace but doom-scrolling. Believing in love but ghosting someone because answering feels too hard. You walk through life patching cracks in your inner logic with duct tape made of rationalizations. And it works, sort of. The real kicker? Sometimes the discomfort becomes identity glue. You start to think the pain of contradiction is part of who you are. You call it being complicated or messy or just figuring things out. And maybe you are. Or maybe you're just orbiting two poles of belief and refusing to let go of either. Tonight, as you lie still, think of all the things you believe about yourself. Now compare them to how you've been acting lately. Feel that tight little twinge behind your ribs. That's your mind trying to make peace with itself. And no, it won't work by morning. You distinctly remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. Or maybe you don't, but a lot of people do. They recall news reports, mourning, televised funerals. Only problem? Mandela lived until 2013. Welcome to the Mandela Effect, a phenomenon where large groups of people confidently remember something that never happened. Not just fuzzy details, but full events, shared, emotional, specific, alternate history scribbled in Sharpie across your neural maps. At first glance, it seems like a simple memory error. You mix something up. Fine. But then it spreads. Others agree. You're not alone. There's comfort in the numbers and confusion. How can so many people misremember the same thing in exactly the same way? Take a stroll through the archives of false recollection. Was it Berenstain Bears or Berenstain? Did the Monopoly man have a monocle? What color is chartreuse, pink or green? And don't even start on the movie Shazam with Sinbad as a genie. Spoiler. It never existed, yet people swear they rented it from Blockbuster. The mainstream explanation is psychological. Our memories are reconstructive, not reproductive. Your brain doesn't store memories like a hard drive. It rebuilds them like a sketch artist taking fuzzy input and guessing the rest. Add in peer reinforcement, pop culture layering, and the weird pressure to remember confidently in public, and boom, entire timelines get invented. But here's your quirky tidbit. Some believe the Mandela effect is a symptom of alternate realities colliding, that the universe split, and in one version, Mandela did die in prison, and you're just feeling the bleed through from that path. Science fiction? Sure, But isn't memory itself a bit of science fiction? A hallucination you agree with? Neurologists are still debating whether this collective misremembering hints at deeper issues in how we store and retrieve memories, or if it's just suggestibility dressed in a trench coat. What's fascinating is that the effect mostly targets trivial facts, things you wouldn't expect to generate such confidence. No one misremembers their own name, but apparently we're collectively terrible at spelling Febreze. Here's where it gets dreamy. If your brain can be this wrong about something you were sure about, what else are you mistaken about? Did your friend really say that thing that offended you? Was that childhood vacation exactly the way you remember? Are you sure? Lie back and imagine walking through a museum of your life. Each room, a year. Each exhibit, a memory. But now imagine that half the labels are wrong. The photos have been swapped. Some displays weren't even yours. They snuck in overnight. But they feel familiar. So you nod and keep walking. Maybe that's the trick. The Mandela effect isn't just about memory. It's about how disturbingly easy it is to accept fiction when it fits our inner story. You believe what feels right, not what's real. And maybe, somewhere in a parallel version of your bedtime routine, you're lying on the same pillow, listening to the same voice, remembering something slightly different. You'll never notice the change. That's the whole point. Someone tells you about a brother and sister who grew up together and, as adults, kissed once. Nothing else happened. No one was hurt. It was consensual. Yet deep inside, your gut clenches. You know it's wrong, but when asked why, you can't explain it clearly. Every reason you give can be picked apart, and still, your conviction doesn't budge. This is moral dumbfounding. When your moral judgment stands firm, even as your reasoning collapses like a soggy cake. You feel that something is wrong, but you can't articulate why. And no, that doesn't make you irrational. It makes you human. The phenomenon was studied in a now famous series of experiments where participants read ethically ambiguous vignettes, harmless but taboo scenarios, and were then asked to justify their outrage. People gave reasons like, it's dangerous, or it sets a bad precedent. But when those were calmly refuted, their moral conviction stayed rooted. They'd often end the conversation with a sigh and some version of, I don't know, it just is. Your mainstream fact of the night. Moral dumbfounding is especially strong when it comes to disgust-based ethics. Things that feel viscerally wrong, even without a logical argument. It's why we struggle to justify certain social taboos, or why laws sometimes linger longer than reason would suggest. Our emotional brain leaps, and our rational brain scrambles to catch up. Quirky tidbit? Philosophers have argued that much of moral reasoning is post hoc storytelling. In other words, your intuition makes a snap judgment, and your reasoning then invents a clever-sounding narrative to justify it. You're not building your morality from scratch. You're defending a feeling that arrived before your thoughts did. Scientists still argue over where morality truly lives in the brain. Is it rooted in evolutionary instinct, survival of the cooperative? Or is it constructed through cultural scaffolding, shaped by whatever stories and symbols you've absorbed since birth? Some fMRI studies show heightened activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex when making moral decisions, but the brain's map is blurry and morality doesn't sit in just one chair. Now here's where things get gently horrifying. If your strongest ethical beliefs are mostly intuitive, then they're susceptible to priming, fatigue, and emotional nudges. One study showed that people judged moral transgressions more harshly if they were standing near a smelly trash can. Another found that simply washing your hands could shift your ethical decisions. That's right. Soap can tilt your conscience. So as you lie there, confident in what you believe is right and wrong, ask yourself this: how much of that certainty is built on solid ground, and how much is built on a vague, gut-level twitch you've learned to obey? Imagine waking up tomorrow with your emotional circuitry rewired. You feel nothing wrong about the same story you heard today. No squirm, no disgust, just neutrality. What would your moral compass look like then? Probably not a compass at all, more like a weather vane, spinning in the breeze of your brain's inner weather. You wake up. The room is dim. You feel the weight of your blanket. The silence is thick, like underwater static. You sit up, or think you do. You shuffle toward the door, but your hand passes through it. Then you wake up again, still in bed. The clock has changed, but your limbs feel like syrup. You struggle upward, and again, something isn't right. You've fallen into a false awakening loop, a dream inside a dream inside a dream, and each time you wake, it feels real, until it doesn't. False awakenings are one of the strangest sleep phenomena, and also one of the most common. Most people experience at least one in their life, but for some, it becomes a spiral, a recursive loop of awakenings layered like those Russian nesting dolls. No matter how many times you wake up, you can't break the cycle. You're trapped in a simulation your own mind keeps rebooting. What's going on here? The prevailing theory is that false awakenings happen during transitions between REM sleep and waking consciousness. Your brain activates some of the sensory and cognitive routines of being awake: vision, thought, a sense of environment, but skips a few crucial checks. So the dream looks like your bedroom. Your thoughts feel lucid, but the light won't turn on. The mirror ripples. Your phone's home screen is blank. Scientists still argue whether false awakenings are just low-level lucid dreams or a unique hybrid state. What makes them uniquely unsettling is that they hijack your trust in reality. You can no longer rely on your senses to confirm you're awake. And once you start questioning, you start testing, pinching yourself, trying to fly, flipping light switches. And if they don't work, your stomach drops. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some documented cases, people have experienced up to 10 nested awakenings before breaking free. That's 10 consecutive dreams, each one convincing enough to pass for real life. Some even woke up, made coffee, fed the cat, and only realized it was a dream when the sun refused to rise. And now, the real kicker. How do you know you're not in one right now? Yes, I'm talking to you, lying there listening to this soft narration, assuming the day is over and your body is safely tucked away. But how many layers deep are you? Did you really get up to brush your teeth earlier? Or was that part of the loop? There's a simple test some lucid dreamers use. Try to push a finger through your palm. In a dream, it passes through like mist. In waking life, nothing happens. Unless you're dreaming more convincingly than usual. Sleep scientists have also noted that false awakenings tend to occur more during stressful periods, when your mind has unfinished business and refuses to let go. The brain tries to rehearse waking up because it doesn't trust that it's safe to fully rest. And so the loop begins. You escape, then wake up again. You try to scream, but your mouth is locked. You flip the pillow, still in the dream. You open the door. There's another door behind it. And behind that, another bed. Another version of you, eyes wide open, already wondering, am I awake yet? Your right hand slowly lifts off your lap. You didn't move it. In fact, you're certain you didn't. But there it goes, reaching, grasping, maybe knocking over a glass, maybe brushing your hair away in an awkward, uninvited gesture. You watch it like a stranger watches a wild animal. That hand, it's not yours. Welcome to the strange world of alien hand syndrome, a real, documented neurological condition where a person's hand seems to act on its own, grabbing, gesturing, even fighting the body it belongs to. Imagine living in a constant tug of war with your own limbs. This isn't a metaphor. People have reported their rogue hand unbuttoning shirts they were trying to button, lighting cigarettes they didn't want to smoke. One woman's hand even slapped her in the face when she tried to sleep. She described it as possessed but clinical. Alien hand syndrome often results from brain damage, particularly in the corpus callosum, the thick neural bridge between the brain's two hemispheres. When this bridge is severed or impaired, the left and right hemispheres lose their smooth communication. Each side starts acting like a separate entity, issuing commands to different parts of the body, often without the other knowing. Your mainstream fact: this phenomenon was most famously observed in split-brain patients, individuals who had their corpus callosum surgically cut, usually to control severe epilepsy. In some of these cases, one hand would perform an action, while the other would try to undo it. A coat would be zipped up with the right hand, only for the left hand to yank it open again. Not out of mischief, but because each side of the brain had its own idea of what should happen. And here's a quirky tidbit. One patient reported their hand developing its own opinions. It would gesture rudely during conversations, or refuse to cooperate with tasks that the rest of the body wanted to complete. They began to think of the hand as a roommate, not a tool, an unwelcome presence that needed to be placated or outsmarted. Scientists still argue whether alien hand syndrome is a motor control issue, a disruption of ownership perception, or something deeper, an exposure of the mind's multiple sub-agents that usually operate behind the curtain. It challenges the idea of free will in a deeply physical way. If you don't control your own hand, where does you end? Even people without neurological damage occasionally experience micro-versions of this phenomenon. Think about your foot tapping on its own, your fingers drumming without your permission. Sure, it's harmless, but scale it up, and you get a limb that opens doors you didn't mean to enter. At night, as you lie still, your hands resting at your sides, your mind might wander. What if your left hand doesn't fully agree with you? What if it harbors quiet resentment from years of underuse? What if, one night, it decides to act? You try to stop it, but you'd need your hands for that, and one of them might not be on your side. Your arm is gone. It was amputated years ago, but tonight it's itching. Deep, maddening, unreachable. Worse, you can feel it move. Your hand, no longer there, clenches into a fist. Your invisible fingers twitch. You swear your wrist flexes with familiar strain, but there is no wrist, no hand, nothing. This is phantom limb syndrome, a chilling and surprisingly common neurological phenomenon where amputees continue to feel sensation, often vivid pain, in a limb that no longer exists. It's not a memory, and it's not imagination. It's as real as any muscle ache, except the muscle's been gone for years. The brain, it turns out, doesn't like to erase things. It prefers to recycle old maps. Your body's representation in the brain, called the homunculus, doesn't update just because you lost a leg or a hand. So the neurons responsible for sensing and moving that limb keep firing, like abandoned phone lines still buzzing with phantom calls. Mainstream fact: around 80 to 90% of amputees experience phantom limb sensations. That's not fringe. That's nearly everyone. Some feel tingling. Others feel crushing pain, curling toes, warmth, cold, cramping. One man insisted his phantom hand was permanently clenched, fingers digging into the ghost of his own palm. He could feel his fingernails piercing skin that wasn't there. And here's your quirky twist. Sometimes people are born without a limb and still feel a phantom one. That means the brain isn't just responding to injury. It's following a template it expected to fill from the beginning. You've got blueprints of a body in your head, whether that body ever physically existed or not. Scientists still argue how exactly these sensations form. Is it cortical reorganization, neighboring brain regions bleeding into the amputated zone? Is it nerve endings in the stump misfiring, sending confused signals up the chain? Or is it something more conceptual, your mind trying to make sense of missing input, like a musician hearing a silent instrument? One of the most famous treatments for phantom limb pain is both bizarre and brilliant: mirror therapy. A mirror is placed beside the remaining limb, reflecting it where the missing one would be. As the person moves their real limb, the brain is tricked into thinking the phantom is moving too. And in many cases, the pain, years of stabbing, burning torment, vanishes just like that. The mind needed to see the hand before it believed it could relax. But here's the haunting part. Sometimes the phantom doesn't respond to mirrors. It doesn't fade. It clings. It evolves. There are documented cases where phantom limbs develop tremors, arthritis, or even positions of paralysis. You're carrying the ghost of an injury in a body that no longer exists. A spectre made entirely of sensation. So as you lie there tonight, hands tucked beneath your pillow, legs curled under the blanket, remember, your brain remembers everything, even things that aren't there, especially things that aren't there. The absence becomes presence. The missing becomes mapped. The gone becomes felt. Somewhere in your brain, there's a little limb you've never noticed, and it might still be moving. You're standing on the edge of a tall building, or a cliff, or the platform at a quiet subway station. You're not sad. You're not suicidal. Everything in your life is more or less fine. And yet, a voice, not loud but firm, whispers in your head, "Jump. This is the call of the void." In French, l'appel du vide. It's not a death wish. It's not madness. It's a strange, universally human flicker of a thought. What if you did the worst possible thing right now? Psychologists call it high place phenomenon. And if you've ever stood at the edge and felt the pull, not from sadness but from some bizarre, unplaceable instinct, you're not alone. Studies suggest that nearly half of people have experienced it. That sudden, wordless nudge towards self-destruction. It's not suicidal ideation. It's a whisper from a deeper level of the mind, one that scientists still don't fully understand. One theory is that it's your brain's misfired safety system. Your mind recognizes a dangerous situation, like standing near a ledge, and sends an exaggerated warning. Jumping would be bad. But somewhere in the translation, that message gets twisted into an urge. Instead of don't, it becomes, what if you did? There's a cognitive trick at work here. You're not being lured into harm. You're just becoming aware of how easy it would be. One step, one movement, the thin line between control and chaos, and that realization, that freedom to ruin everything, flickers like a match in the dark. Your quirky tidbit, the call of the void, isn't limited to heights. Some people feel it when holding a baby, the sudden dread of dropping them. Others while driving. What if I veered into oncoming traffic, or even holding a knife? I could ruin everything in a single second. These aren't signs of violence. They're proof that your brain is aware of its power, that you could and that you won't, but only because something deeper restrains you. And yet, the thought still comes. Scientists still argue whether these flashes of darkness serve any purpose. Are they reminders of mortality, a test of self-control, or the mind's way of processing freedom by briefly fantasizing about destroying it? The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once described it as the vertigo of possibility. You stand at the edge not out of despair, but because you're overwhelmed by the truth that you could. No one's stopping you. You are entirely, frighteningly free. It's the paradox of being conscious, knowing you could end your own awareness, that you hold the off switch, but choose moment by moment not to use it. And so tonight, as you lie still, drifting deeper into sleep, maybe your mind wanders. Maybe a strange, sharp idea cuts through the calm like a flash of static. Nothing serious, nothing you'd act on. Just a flicker, a dark possibility, quietly offered by the void. You don't take it, of course, but it was there, and it always will be. You can't move. You can't speak. Your eyes are open. Or are they? Something is sitting on your chest. Heavy, ancient, watching. The room feels the same, but the air is thick like syrup. There's a shadow in the corner, taller than the doorframe, and it knows you can see it. But you can't scream. You can't even twitch. Welcome to sleep paralysis, a bridge between waking and dreaming that your body was never meant to cross consciously. And for some unlucky sleepers, it's not just a frozen moment. It's a haunted theater where your mind plays out its deepest fears, life-sized and merciless. Sleep paralysis happens when you wake during REM sleep, when your brain is active and dreaming, but your body is paralyzed to prevent you from acting out your dreams. Normally, you're unconscious during this stage, but sometimes you wake up mentally while your body stays locked. You're trapped inside a frozen shell, aware, breathless, utterly helpless. Mainstream fact: about 8% of the general population experiences sleep paralysis at some point. For people with narcolepsy, PTSD, or irregular sleep cycles, the numbers jump much higher. And while many just feel stuck or suffocated, a significant portion experience hallucinations, visual, auditory, even tactile. That's where the real horror begins. Enter shadow people. Reports are eerily consistent across cultures. A figure stands at the foot of the bed or crouches near the pillow. It's not a dream, at least not just a dream. It's there. You feel it. You hear it breathing. Sometimes it sits on your chest, crushing you. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it climbs the wall. In Japan, it's called kanashibari, bound by metal ropes. In parts of Africa, it's a demonic force. In Newfoundland, it's the old hag. In Brazil, it's a night witch called pisadeira. Despite geography, languages, beliefs, the stories align. A presence. Paralysis. Dread. Scientists still argue whether the hallucinations are a byproduct of disrupted REM or the brain's desperate attempt to make sense of being awake while dreaming. Some think it's the amygdala, the fear center, firing at full tilt, painting the dark with monsters because your body's stuck and vulnerable. Your ancient brain assumes, if I can't move, something must be pinning me. Quirky detail. Not all sleep paralysis experiences are terrifying. A tiny portion of people report peaceful or even euphoric moments, feeling like they're floating or melting into the bed. But those are rare. Most people, they meet the shadows. Now think about this. What if those figures aren't entirely hallucinations? What if the reason so many people see them is because they're real, just visible only when consciousness flickers between layers. A liminal vision, like catching a glimpse of your reflection in water. Not quite real, not quite false. And when you finally snap awake, panting and sweat-soaked, you tell yourself it wasn't real. You say, just a dream. But your body remembers. Your chest still aches. Your pupils still dilated. And deep down, you wonder, what if it's not that the thing wasn't real, but that it didn't need to be? Because in that moment, it owned you, and you'll never forget how easily it did. You're holding an orange in your left hand. Your right hand reaches out to grab it, but suddenly the two hands hesitate. One moves too fast. The other pulls away. You're watching them like mismatched puppets, each obeying a slightly different master. And then, the voices in your head start to argue, out loud. Welcome to split brain syndrome. In the middle of your brain lies the corpus callosum, a thick bundle of over 200 million nerve fibers that allows your left and right hemispheres to communicate. It's the mind's private internet, connecting emotion and logic, movement and intention. But what happens when you cut that connection? You get two brains, living in the same skull, and they don't always agree. The procedure, called a corpus callosotomy, was once a treatment for severe epilepsy. The idea was to stop seizures from spreading between hemispheres. It worked, but it also revealed something deeply unsettling. Without that bridge, the two sides of the brain behave like separate consciousnesses. Here's a mainstream fact. In split brain patients, the right hemisphere, which controls the left hand and visual field, often doesn't have language, but it still thinks. In one classic experiment, researchers flashed the word key to the left visual field, controlled by the right brain, and ring to the right visual field, controlled by the left brain. When asked what they saw, the patient said, ring. But when asked to pick up the object with their left hand, they grabbed a key. Two answers, one mind. Things get weirder. One patient's left hand repeatedly tried to interfere with what the right hand was doing, buttoning a shirt only for the other hand to unbutton it. One side wrote, I want to live, while the other scrawled, I hate life. Some patients reported their left hand doing things without permission, like slapping themselves or pushing away food they consciously wanted. Not out of malice, just disagreement, quirky tidbit. The left hemisphere is the explainer. It makes up stories to justify behavior, even if it doesn't know the real reason. In one study, a command was sent only to the right hemisphere, stand up. The patient stood. When asked why, the left hemisphere confidently replied, oh, I wanted to get a Coke. A guess, a fiction, but delivered with full certainty. Scientists still argue over what this means for the nature of the self. Is there really one you, or just a cooperative illusion between multiple systems? When the bridge is intact, the coordination feels seamless. You think, you act, no conflict. But sever that link, and suddenly your thoughts aren't unified. They're negotiated. So as you lie there tonight, motionless, breathing, you may feel very much like a singular person. But deep inside, your left hemisphere is analyzing this narrative, applying logic, language, and memory. Your right hemisphere, meanwhile, is soaking up tone, rhythm, emotion, and imagery. And though they're working together, they are not the same. If those two halves ever stopped talking, you'd still be you. But maybe you'd start to notice the arguments. You wake up with pain in your legs. It pulses deep and heavy. Your joints ache, Your back is stiff, and there's a dull, throbbing pressure behind your eyes. You stagger out of bed, certain you're coming down with something. But your doctor runs every test and finds nothing. Blood work, clean. Imaging, normal. Diagnosis, unclear. This is somatic symptom disorder, where your body cries out, but there's no organic injury to point to. The pain is real, the suffering is real, but the origin, somewhere in the tangled space between emotion and sensation, thought and flesh. You're not faking, you're not just anxious. Your brain is translating psychological stress into physical signals, and then convincing you those signals must have a medical source. Mainstream fact: roughly 5 to 7% of the population meets the criteria for this disorder, though experts believe it's significantly underdiagnosed. It's more common in women, often begins before age 30, and frequently emerges after trauma, prolonged stress, or illness. What makes somatic symptom disorder so elusive is that it doesn't behave like typical psychosomatic symptoms. It feels like a body problem. The pain is persistent, specific, and often chronic. Some people experience gastrointestinal issues, fatigue, or neurological symptoms like numbness or tremors. Others suffer from heart palpitations or respiratory difficulty. Yet every test comes back normal. It's like your body's a movie prop, perfectly built, but filled with invisible fire. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some historical periods, entire groups of people experience mass outbreaks of somatic symptoms. One of the most famous? The 1518 dancing plague of Strasbourg, where dozens of people danced uncontrollably for days, some to death. No virus, no bacteria, just an epidemic of embodied hysteria, a cultural mind trapped in aching, twitching flesh. Scientists still argue where the mind-body line really lies. Some posit that somatic symptom disorder comes from a hypervigilant nervous system, always scanning for danger, then overinterpreting normal bodily sensations. A flutter becomes a threat. A twitch becomes a tumor. The body becomes a mystery novel your brain is desperate to solve, but only has a red pen and a magnifying glass. And while modern medicine has grown increasingly technical, labs, scans, imaging, the subjective world of felt experience still confounds it. If you say you're in pain, but the machine says you're fine, who do we believe? Therapies exist. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to help, but treatment is slow, delicate, and often undermined by shame. You're told it's all in your head, as if that makes it less real. But where else would your body's perception of pain live, if not the brain? Tonight, as you lie still and settle into your skin, consider this. Every ache you've ever felt, every twinge, every chill, every breathless panic, it all passed through the filter of your thoughts. There is no pain without a brain to recognize it, no breathlessness without awareness, no tightness without context. And sometimes the body doesn't hurt to alert you to danger. Sometimes it hurts just to speak. You're awake. You hear voices around you, machines beeping. A nurse walks by. You see everything. Your vision is sharp. Your mind is clear. But when you try to speak, nothing comes out. You try to blink, to move your fingers, anything. But your body is unresponsive. You are locked in. This is locked-in syndrome, a rare neurological disorder where a person is fully conscious and aware but completely paralyzed, unable to move or communicate, except sometimes through the blink of an eye. It sounds like fiction, but it's chillingly real. Locked-in syndrome is often caused by a stroke or traumatic brain injury, particularly in the brainstem's pons, the area responsible for relaying signals between the brain and body. When that pathway is damaged, your cognitive functions remain intact, but your body becomes silent, like screaming into a pillow that is your own skin. Your mainstream fact: most locked-in patients can hear everything around them. They understand language, they feel emotions, they just can't respond. Families often assume the person is in a coma or vegetative state, until maybe one day someone notices a blink. One deliberate blink. From there, entire systems of communication are built. Alphabet boards, eye-tracking software, yes-no blinks. One blink for yes, two for no. And suddenly, the person who seemed lost starts speaking again, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Quirky tidbit: one of the most haunting memoirs ever written, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, was composed by a man with locked-in syndrome using just one blinking eye. He dictated every word by blinking at the correct letter on a board held up by a nurse. 200,000 blinks to write a life. The book is vivid, poetic, and heartbreaking. It reminds us the mind can soar, even when the body can't twitch. But here's where it gets truly eerie. Some researchers believe that mild, undiagnosed versions of locked-in syndrome may go unnoticed. The person may appear vegetative, but actually retains full awareness, trapped in their own body, screaming silently for years. This possibility has led to more advanced EEG and brain-computer interface research, trying to detect awareness through neural activity alone. Scientists still argue where consciousness lives in the brain, and how much of it is detectable from the outside. Are we underestimating the minds locked behind unblinking eyes? Can thought be proven without expression? And if a person cannot act or communicate, are they truly present or somewhere else? Here's a disquieting thought to tuck under your pillow. We judge someone as conscious because they move, speak, react, but remove the mechanics, and what remains? A soul with no keyboard. A mind cut off from the world it still remembers vividly. So as you lie there now, your muscles relaxed, your breath slow, feel that strange comfort. Your body obeys you. Your eyes dart. Your fingers twitch. You take these things for granted. But to someone else, each blink is a sentence. Each sigh, a paragraph. Somewhere, someone is listening to the radio in their head and hoping someone notices the blink. You're sitting in a wheelchair, motionless. Your leg doesn't move. Your hand can't grip. The nurse asks you to stand. You say, "Of course I can." She insists. You insist harder. She helps you up, and you collapse. Still, you smile and say, "I just need to stretch." This is anosognosia, a condition where someone is completely unaware of their own neurological impairment. They're blind, but say they can see. Paralyzed, but insist they can walk. The brain, in its quiet rebellion, has chosen denial not as a coping strategy, but as a built-in feature. Unlike denial in the everyday sense, where we know something's true but don't want to face it, anosognosia is different. The awareness is simply absent. The part of the brain that monitors the body is damaged, and the self-check engine light never comes on. There's no sense of "I can't," only a confidently mistaken "I can." Mainstream fact: anosognosia is common in people who've had strokes, particularly those affecting the right hemisphere, which controls the left side of the body. It also appears in some cases of schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease. Patients may deny hallucinations, memory problems, or delusions because their brain has short-circuited its own internal diagnostic tool. One patient, after a right hemisphere stroke, was asked to clap her hands. She enthusiastically raised her right hand, and her paralyzed left arm just dangled. When asked why she didn't clap, she replied cheerfully, "Because you didn't give me enough room." Not frustration, not fear, just a smoothly manufactured excuse offered by a brain convinced it's still running normally. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some patients with anosognosia will make increasingly elaborate stories to explain their impairments. One man, completely blind, claimed he didn't want to read the eye chart because the doctor's breath smelled bad. Another insisted he wasn't paralyzed, he just didn't feel like moving that day. Scientists still argue about what exactly causes anosognosia. Is it a failure of sensory input, where the brain can't receive data about the body? Or is it more abstract, a failure of self-awareness, where the brain receives the data but refuses to register it in the story of me? What makes it so unsettling is that it reveals how fragile the concept of self really is. You think you know your body. You think you'd notice if something stopped working. But if the mechanism that notices is damaged, you're left spinning fictions that seem perfectly reasonable, at least to you. There's even a term for the broader phenomenon, metacognition, your ability to think about your own thinking. When that meta layer falters, the results aren't just errors, they're entire alternate realities. You become a confident narrator with missing pages, calmly describing a world that no longer exists. So as you lie there now, feeling your fingers twitch, your chest rise, your mind hum gently with the rhythm of breath and thought, ask yourself this: would you know if something stopped working? Or would you tell a charming story, just like always? Would you laugh and say, "Oh, I just didn't feel like blinking today," unaware that your eyelids haven't moved in hours? Because the only thing scarier than losing a part of yourself is never noticing it's gone. You remember the date, the smell in the air, the sweater you wore. You remember what the waiter said, the shape of the salt shaker, the playlist humming in the background, and the exact angle the light hit the table. Not because it was special, but because you remember everything. This is hyperthymesia, or highly superior autobiographical memory, HSAM. A rare and haunting condition where people can recall nearly every day of their lives with uncanny, involuntary precision. No effort, no tricks, just perfect, permanent storage. For most, memory is like a river, flowing, murky, often missing entire pieces. For someone with hyperthymesia, it's more like a video archive, indexed by date, searchable by smell, always playing. You say a date, June 14th, 2007, and they blink, smile, and tell you what they ate for breakfast, the temperature outside, and what mood they were in that morning. Mainstream fact? Fewer than 100 people have been officially identified with hyperthymesia worldwide. The first documented case was a woman named Jill Price, who described her memory as a running movie that never stops. She couldn't forget even when she wanted to. And that's the catch. Hyperthymesia isn't always a gift. Most of us forget to heal. Time smooths the edges. Grief becomes blurrier. But for someone with perfect recall, every heartbreak is preserved in high definition. Every loss is freshly sharpened. There's no fading, no distance, no forgiveness that time naturally provides. Here's your quirky tidbit. People with HSAM don't have better memories for everything. They're not photographic. They don't remember equations or long strings of numbers better than average. Their superpower is painfully specific, autobiographical, personal, emotional, days lived, moments felt. Scientists still argue about what causes hypothymesia. Some point to differences in the caudate nucleus and temporal lobes, regions linked to habit, memory, and OCD-like repetition. Others suspect that people with HSAM spend more time ruminating, replaying memories obsessively, engraving them deeper with each cycle. The brain, it seems, remembers what it's told is important. And the truth is, your brain forgets on purpose. Memory is inherently lossy. It edits, compresses, makes guesses. You misremember to survive. You forget to move forward. But for someone with hypothymesia, the past isn't past. It's a persistent present, always humming beneath the surface, always watching. Imagine lying in bed and closing your eyes, only to fall, not into sleep, but into last Tuesday, or your 12th birthday, or the exact moment you realize someone didn't love you back. There's no escape, no dreamless void, just more memory, more time, more versions of you, all pressing against the walls of now. And here's the haunting part. You already have some of that, those memories you can't forget, the arguments you replay, the look someone gave you in 2011 that still stings, the feeling you can't name, but know by heart. You're not cursed with hypothymesia, but your mind remembers what it needs to, or at least what it thinks you deserve to keep. You're brushing your teeth and a thought bursts into your head. The sky is made of jelly. You laugh. Weird. Nonsense. But later, another thought slips in. Your neighbor is spying on you through the walls. This one feels less silly. Not quite yours. You didn't choose to think it. It arrived like junk mail through a slot you didn't know was open. This is thought insertion, a symptom most famously associated with certain forms of schizophrenia, where individuals feel that thoughts are being planted in their mind by an external force. Not suggested, not inspired, inserted. Imagine thinking, but feeling like someone else did the typing. Mainstream fact: thought insertion is one of the core symptoms used to diagnose psychotic disorders. People describe it as alien ideas appearing in their head, sometimes neutral, sometimes disturbing, but always unmistakably not theirs. It's not the same as a wandering mind. It's not, I don't know why I thought that. It's, I know I didn't think that. And yet, the thought is there. One patient described it like this: my head is a shared apartment. I live here, but someone keeps leaving notes in the kitchen. Another said, I can hear my thoughts, but some of them have accents. That's the level of precision. These aren't just intrusive thoughts, like the kind we all get. These feel authored by someone else, delivered with intention. Quirky tidbit: in a reverse twist, some patients experience the opposite, thought broadcasting. They believe their private thoughts are being projected outward, audible to others, like an unmuted mic in a silent room. People on the street, reacting to your inner dialogue. Strangers, smirking at your secrets. Scientists still argue whether thought insertion is a disruption of agency, your mind's ability to label an experience as self-generated. Normally, your brain runs this check behind the scenes. You think something, and a quiet stamp of me gets applied. But what if that label goes missing? You think, you feel, but the me is gone. The signal comes in, but the return address is blank. The neurological suspect is often the parietal lobe, especially areas linked to body ownership and self-recognition. When damaged or misfiring, the brain starts to lose track of what belongs to you. And if your fingers can feel foreign, so can your thoughts. And then there's the darker cultural twist. Thought insertion is one of the oldest metaphors for divine possession. Prophets hearing the voice of God. Poets receiving lines from the ether. In the ancient world, thought ownership was already flexible. Only modern neuroscience insists that all ideas must come from inside. But what if they don't? Tonight, as you lie there, mind drifting like a balloon on a string, pay attention to the thoughts that pass through. Some are yours. Some might not feel that way. You'll shrug them off. You'll think, weird. But the next time a sentence pops in fully formed, uninvited, and unfamiliar, ask yourself, did I just think that? Or did I just hear it? You move carefully through the hallway, shoulders hunched, arms pressed tight to your sides. You avoid sharp corners. You don't sit on hard benches. You barely breathe. Not because you're afraid of injury, but because you're convinced your body is made of glass. This is the glass delusion, a rare and largely forgotten disorder that swept across Europe during the late Middle Ages and persisted into the 17th century. People, often wealthy, educated, otherwise lucid, became convinced they were fragile sculptures, that their bones were glass rods, that their skin might shatter if touched too roughly, and they lived accordingly, cautious, restrained, terrified. One of the most famous sufferers, King Charles VI of France. He believed his body was made entirely of glass and insisted on wearing padded clothing at all times. He forbade anyone from touching him and refused to sit without pillows arranged just right. This wasn't theatrical eccentricity. It was sincere, chronic fear. Mainstream fact? The glass delusion was considered a form of melancholia, or what we'd now call depression, with psychotic features. It predominantly affected nobles and scholars, people burdened with introspection, high stress, and often too much time alone. In an era where mental illness had no clear language, they described their condition with the materials they understood. And glass? In the 1400s, it was precious, beautiful, new, just strong enough to be shaped, just fragile enough to fear. It was the perfect metaphor for a mind under pressure. Your quirky tidbit: some sufferers didn't believe their whole body was glass, just parts. One man was convinced his buttocks were crystal and refused to sit down for over a year. Another believed his stomach was a bottle that could crack if he moved too quickly. There were physicians who specialized in treating glass bodies, prescribing warm baths, gentle massages, and most ironically, lots of wine. Scientists still argue what exactly caused this bizarre outbreak. Was it cultural suggestion? A collective metaphor taken too literally? A subconscious rebellion against the expectations of perfection and grace in high society? Some modern psychiatrists consider it a culturally shaped version of delusional misidentification syndrome, where the mind assigns false properties to parts of the self. But maybe the deeper truth is simpler. Maybe glass was just the best language they had for describing how they felt. You know that sensation, don't you? Feeling like you'll break if someone says the wrong thing. Feeling transparent, exposed, fragile, under scrutiny. Maybe you've never wrapped yourself in pillows, but you've had days where every movement feels like too much. Now, in our own time, the glass delusion has vanished, at least in name. But in its place, new metaphors have emerged. People feeling broken, fractured, shattered. We still use the language of fragility, only now with different materials. Instead of glass, we say burnout. We say, cracked under pressure. We say, I'm barely holding it together. So tonight, as you lie still, limbs soft against your bed, ask yourself, how solid do you really feel? Could you, too, be more delicate than you appear? Or maybe you've just been taught to act solid, while secretly rattling under the skin. Either way, sleep gently. You wouldn't want to shatter. Two people, one delusion, shared perfectly, like a secret handshake or an invisible thread pulled tight across two minds. It starts small. Maybe just a belief that someone's being watched, or that something in the walls is listening. And then it grows. Because now, it's not just one person imagining it. It's both. This is folie à deux, literally, madness of two. A rare psychological condition where a delusional belief is transmitted from one individual to another. Not like an opinion, not like gossip, like a virus of the mind. It most often happens between people who are extremely close. Siblings, spouses, parent and child, long-term roommates. There's usually a dominant individual, the primary, who originates the belief. The secondary, often more passive, anxious, or dependent, absorbs it completely. No resistance, no skepticism. Suddenly, the voices one person hears are now a shared experience. Mainstream fact: folie à deux is a formally recognized psychiatric syndrome with subtypes. In some versions, both people are fully psychotic. In others, only the primary is, and the secondary adopts the delusion through sheer psychological gravity. Remove them from each other, and often the delusion dissolves. One of the most chilling real-life cases involved the Erickson twins, who became globally infamous after a strange and violent breakdown caught on camera. The details are still debated, but what's clear is this: they were tightly bonded, exhibiting mirrored behavior and shared paranoia. The intensity of their connection may have amplified their detachment from reality. And here's your quirky twist: folie à deux isn't limited to pairs. There's folie à trois, madness of three, folie en famille, a whole household infected, and even folie à plusieurs, shared psychosis among groups. It's not hard to imagine, is it? Conspiracy forums, cults, online rabbit holes. When belief is contagious and community becomes the vector, the shared story starts to breathe. Scientists still argue what makes some people more susceptible. Is it emotional dependence, a lack of critical thinking, or is it something more primal, our deep survival-driven need to synchronize with those we trust? After all, belief is safer in company. If someone else sees what you see, it must be real, right? Imagine the comfort, no longer being the only one who hears the ticking in the walls, no longer being laughed at for thinking the government is tracking your shoelaces. The loneliness of delusion melts when shared. But it's also a trap. Because if you and your partner both believe the door is cursed, who will ever open it? Now picture yourself alone in a room late at night, staring into the shadows. You hear a knock, but no one else is there. You tell someone. They say they hear it too. Maybe they do. Maybe they just want to be close to you. Maybe they'll believe anything to stay connected. And so the knock becomes a truth. The fear becomes a fact. And the story you whisper to each other in the dark becomes a reality you both live in. So tonight, listen carefully to your thoughts, but more carefully to who's agreeing with them. You're lying on your back, staring at the ceiling. You wonder why you're awake. Then you wonder why you wonder. And then, why you care. One thought folds into another, each questioning the one before it, like a hall of mirrors reflecting reflections of reflections. You are now trapped in the quiet whirlpool of the infinite regress of introspection. It starts simply. Why did I do that? A common question. But soon, your mind counters. Why do I care about why I did that? And then, what does it say about me that I care? Before long, you're asking why you're asking why you're asking why, and the loop swallows you whole. This isn't just overthinking. It's a psychological recursion error, a loop of self-analysis that becomes so tight it chokes off any actionable thought. And the deeper you go, the more it feeds on itself. It's the internal equivalent of typing define into a search bar and watching your brain freeze. Mainstream fact. Recursive self-focused thinking is a known contributor to anxiety and depression. It masquerades as insight, but often leads nowhere. You feel like you're getting closer to clarity, but really, you're just circling the same drain pool. Rumination disguised as revelation. Quirky tidbit. The ancient Greek philosopher Pyrrho was so paralyzed by introspection, doubting everything he perceived, that his friends had to walk with him in public to stop him from falling into holes or walking into carts. He'd get lost wondering whether the cart existed in the first place. Modern psychology has a name for a similar state: dissociation. You start questioning the structure of reality so thoroughly that it begins to blur. Your thoughts become foggy. Your hands feel unreal. You doubt your intentions, then your memory, then yourself. Scientists still argue how much introspection is too much. Some believe it's essential to healthy cognition, understanding your motives, adjusting your behavior. But others point to what's called the introspection illusion, the belief that we understand ourselves better than we actually do. We don't see who we are. We see the story we like telling ourselves. And if you dig too deep, the story dissolves. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that reflects not your face, but your intentions. You ask, why do I want what I want? And the mirror answers with another question, and then another. Soon you're staring not at answers, but at a string of looping prompts, each demanding a depth your mind was never built to plumb. There's no bottom to the self. That's the secret. There's no final you to uncover, just layers of reasons and feelings and reactions, woven together like threads pretending to be a whole. So tonight, if you catch your mind asking itself why it thinks what it thinks, pause. Because just a few steps further down that spiral, and you'll forget what you were even trying to find. Or worse, realize the seeker is just another part of the maze. You're sitting at a cafe. The sunlight is nice. The conversation is fine. And then, someone at the next table starts chewing. Wetly, slowly, mouth open. Chew, slurp, swallow. Your pulse rises. You can't focus. You want to scream or cry or disappear into your coffee. You're absolutely certain that this is personal. This is misophonia, a condition where specific everyday sounds trigger an intense, involuntary emotional reaction. Not mild irritation, not casual dislike, but rage, disgust, panic, like a fire alarm, but only you can hear it. Mainstream fact. Though not yet formally recognized in every diagnostic manual, misophonia is gaining traction in scientific literature. Studies suggest that around 15 to 20% of people have some form of it. Common triggers include chewing, breathing, throat clearing, pen clicking, sniffling, and tapping. Innocent sounds that somehow become weaponized inside your head. And it's not just emotional. fMRI scans show that people with misophonia exhibit increased activity in the anterior insular cortex, the part of the brain associated with emotion and bodily regulation. In some cases, the autonomic nervous system kicks in, as if responding to a threat. Heart racing, fist clenching, jaw tightening. You're not annoyed, you're under siege. Quirky tidbit? Misophonia often targets specific people. It's not just the sound, it's who's making it. A stranger chewing may annoy you, but your sibling or spouse chewing, that's unholy warfare. And oddly enough, recordings of the same sound don't always trigger the same fury. It's not just the noise, it's the context, the person, the sense that you're being disrespected by a noise that shouldn't exist in your sacred ear space. Scientists still argue whether misophonia is a sound processing disorder, a neurological sensitivity, or a learned emotional response that calcifies over time. Some researchers think it's rooted in early life experiences, perhaps a traumatic moment involving loud or repetitive sounds. Others suspect it's genetic, possibly a trait that evolved for ultra-sensitivity in social environments, now misfiring in a world full of chip bags and keyboard clacking. It's a paradoxical condition. You know the reaction is extreme. You don't want to feel it, but your body lurches forward before your mind can stop it. It's like allergic rage, invisible, irrational, and impossible to explain to someone who's never wanted to leap across a room and silence a gum chewer with a stare. And here's the strange, silent horror of it all. The more you notice the sound, the louder it gets. Your focus feeds it. Trying to ignore it is like trying not to think of a pink elephant chewing noodles with its mouth open. Once it's heard, it's there, like a mental splinter that pulses with every blink. So tonight, in your quiet bed, take a moment to appreciate the stillness, the hush of a well-behaved room. But know this, in some brain just like yours, someone is lying awake because the person in the apartment above is breathing wrong. Not loudly, just wrong. And that's enough. You're staring at your leg. It's there. It works. It's healthy. But something deep inside whispers that it shouldn't be. You feel a strange unease, like an intruder has taken up residence inside your own skin. And the thought starts repeating, gentle at first, then louder. This part of me doesn't belong. This is body integrity identity disorder, a rare and deeply unsettling condition in which a person feels that a specific limb or body part is foreign, unwanted, not theirs. And for some, the desire isn't just discomfort. It's the persistent urge to have the limb removed. It sounds unimaginable. Why would someone want to amputate a healthy arm or leg? But for those who live with BIID, the feeling is lifelong, vivid, and intensely distressing. Many report first noticing it as children, standing in the mirror, folding a leg up, or tucking an arm into a sleeve, trying to imagine what their body would look like correctly. Mainstream fact, BIID is extremely rare and not fully understood, but it's been documented in multiple medical journals. Some sufferers go as far as to ask surgeons for voluntary amputations, requests that are almost always denied. Others take matters into their own hands, sometimes inflicting injury to force a medical procedure. Here's your quirky and quietly chilling tidbit. In fMRI studies of individuals with BIID, certain areas of the brain, especially the right superior parietal lobe, show abnormalities. That's the region responsible for constructing your body map, your inner sense of this is me. In some of these brains, that map seems incomplete. The area representing the unwanted limb is blank, so the person doesn't hate the limb. It just feels like an extra, like a third arm grafted on in the night. Scientists still argue whether BIID is more akin to a neurological misfire or a deeply embedded identity disorder. Is the brain failing to integrate the limb into the self? Or is it that the self's mental image was never whole to begin with? Some compare BIID to gender dysphoria, not in experience, but in structure. A profound mismatch between internal identity and external form. Others say it's a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, where the thought becomes an intrusive loop. But none of these labels quite capture it, because the real horror of BIID is subtle. It's not pain, not drama, just a persistent, quiet conviction that your body is wrong, not broken, not diseased, just misassembled. Now imagine the daily performance. Waking up, putting on both shoes, walking around like everything is fine. Meanwhile, your reflection feels alien. Your left leg, or your right hand, pulses with this strange emotional static. Not because it hurts, but because it exists. You don't want to be injured. You just want to be right. So tonight, as you lie still beneath your blanket, notice how your limbs nest comfortably against the sheets. They belong. You feel that, don't you? That wholeness? For some, that feeling never arrives. Their body is their home, but the guest room refuses to empty. And sometimes they just want to tear down the walls. You're just about to fall asleep, drifting, weightless, the last thought slipping away. And then, boom, a deafening crash, a gunshot, a cymbal slam. Your brain jolts awake, heart pounding, eyes wide. But there's nothing. No sound, no noise, no explosion. Welcome to exploding head syndrome. A name that sounds made up, maybe even comical, until you experience it. A sleep disorder in which your brain creates an auditory hallucination so sudden, so violent, that it feels like the universe just snapped a rubber band in your skull. Despite its name, there's no pain. No actual explosion, just a phantom sound so loud and unexpected that your body reacts as if something catastrophic has happened. You might hear a thunderclap, a scream, a door slam, a gunshot, or, most commonly, a bright electric zap. Mainstream fact: around 10% of people experience exploding head syndrome at some point in their lives. It tends to occur in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, usually during the transition into non-REM sleep. It's harmless, medically speaking. But try telling that to your fight or flight response when it's sprinting down the hallway in your chest. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some people also see flashes of light when it happens, or feel a rush of wind, or hear whispers. One person described it as a flashbang grenade going off inside my brain every Tuesday. Another said it felt like someone unplugged the universe, then plugged it back in. Scientists still argue about what causes exploding head syndrome. Some theories suggest it's the result of a delayed shutdown in the brainstem's reticular formation, which manages the switch between wakefulness and sleep. When that process misfires, the brain tries to turn off, but ends up short-circuiting, unleashing one last burst of sensory noise. Others propose it's related to calcium channel activity in the brain, similar to migraines, but targeting auditory centers instead of pain pathways. And still others suspect it may be linked to stress, fatigue, and sleep disruption, like your brain throws one last tantrum before finally agreeing to rest. The most unsettling part: it feels intentional. You don't just hear a sound, you hear a warning, a psychic fire alarm with no fire, a punch of sensory betrayal. You lie there afterwards, scanning the room, checking your heart rate, listening for intruders. But there's never anyone there, just you, and a brain that occasionally screams at itself. Now imagine lying in bed, peacefully slipping into sleep. Your muscles relax, Your breath slows. The edges of consciousness begin to blur. And then, snap. Reality slaps you in the face, loudly and without warning. It's not danger. It's not memory. It's just a misfire. A neurological flinch with no source and no target. You lie awake, wide-eyed, adrenaline humming through your veins, wondering why the silence feels like it's hiding something louder. And the irony? It only happens when you're about to let go. That's the secret cruelty. Exploding head syndrome doesn't strike in chaos. It waits for quiet. It waits for peace. Then it cracks it open. So if you hear it tonight, don't panic. Just smile. It means your brain is trying to power down. But sometimes the off switch sparks first. You reach for the orange juice, but you miss. Not because your aim is bad, because you didn't see the glass sitting right there on the left side of the counter. It's invisible to you. Not blurry, not peripheral, just gone. This is hemispatial neglect, often referred to simply as neglect syndrome. It's not blindness. It's not a vision problem. It's a disorder of awareness, usually following damage to the right hemisphere of the brain, where the brain forgets that the left side of the world exists. Patients with neglect syndrome might eat from only one side of a plate, shave just half of their face, apply makeup to just the right side, and when asked why they didn't finish, why they left half a pancake untouched, they'll look confused and say, "I did finish," because in their mind, the other side wasn't there to begin with. Mainstream fact: hemispatial neglect is most often caused by strokes that damage the right parietal lobe. This part of the brain is responsible for spatial attention and awareness. Damage here doesn't just make the left side fuzzy, it deletes it from conscious access. One entire hemisphere of reality gets softly erased. Here's your quirky and quietly eerie tidbit. If you show someone with neglect a drawing of a clock and ask them to copy it, they might draw all 12 numbers, but cram them onto the right side of the circle. It's not carelessness. It's a warped internal compass. North has tilted. The map has folded. Now consider this. The condition isn't limited to physical space. Some patients also exhibit personal neglect, forgetting or ignoring the left side of their own body. They may deny ownership of their left arm or be startled when someone touches it, asking, "Whose arm is that?" Scientists still argue about the deeper implications. Is the neglected space gone from perception or from attention? Are these patients not seeing or just not registering what they see? Some say the visual input is intact, the eyes work, but the awareness fails to ignite. The brain receives the light, but never opens the door. And here's the more metaphorical horror. We may all have our own forms of neglect. Asymmetries in attention, blind spots in self-awareness. We forget parts of ourselves, ignore emotional bruises, mentally turn away from things that once lived in full view. Sometimes the mind doesn't scream, it just erases. So tonight, as you lie still, feeling your left and right limbs mirrored beneath the blanket, remember, your sense of space, of balance, of world is not a given. It's a construct, a story your brain tells you. And with the right damage, the left side of that story disappears. The room doesn't shrink, your mind does. And the glass stays untouched on the left side of the counter, because, as far as you're concerned, it was never there. The lights go out, not just around you, inside you. There's no sound, no sunlight, no clock. You can't tell if it's been hours or days. Time collapses. Thought stretches. Your breath gets louder. Your heartbeat becomes company. And then your mind starts talking back. This is induced delusional thinking via isolation, the psychological unraveling that occurs when the human brain is cut off from all external input for too long. Sensory deprivation doesn't bring peace. It brings hallucination, paranoia, and, in extreme cases, full-blown psychosis. Not because you're broken, but because your brain was never meant to be alone with itself. Mainstream fact: the effects of prolonged isolation have been studied in sensory deprivation tanks, solitary confinement, even long-distance space simulations. Deprived of sights, sounds, smells, and social interaction, the brain begins to hallucinate to fill the silence. It invents voices. It replays memories as if they're real. It turns inward, then loops, then cracks. In one infamous 1950s experiment, volunteers were paid to lie in silent, dim rooms with padded visors, muffled ears, and gloved hands. They didn't last long. Within 48 hours, subjects began seeing shapes, hearing phantom music, and losing track of where they were. Some began to cry, others laughed uncontrollably. One begged to be released after talking to his own shadow for several hours. Here's your quirky tidbit. NASA has studied isolation closely to prepare astronauts for deep space missions. Simulations in enclosed habitats like HICs and Mars 500 have revealed fascinating quirks. Crew members creating imaginary routines, assigning personalities to machines, even dreaming in real time, unsure of when waking began. One astronaut said, "I stopped thinking in days. I started thinking in loops." Scientists still argue how much of this descent is caused by sensory loss versus social loss. Is it the absence of touch and sound, or the absence of other minds to bounce against? Humans are social creatures. Our thoughts are mirrors. Without someone else's gaze, we forget how to calibrate our own. And then comes the delusion. Some people in solitary report feeling watched, even in complete darkness. Others believe the walls are shrinking, or that they're becoming transparent, or that someone is behind them. Not metaphorically, physically, waiting. You might start to believe your food is poisoned, that the guards are lying about the date, that your memories are implanted, that the voice you hear breathing beside you belongs to you, but not quite. Tonight, you're not in solitary. You're warm, comfortable, tethered to reality by a mattress, a ceiling, and maybe a phone glowing somewhere nearby. But imagine if those things disappeared. No sound, no screen, no mirror, just your breath. Would you still know you're real? How many days would it take before your mind began to invent reality again? Because that's the truth. Your brain doesn't need company. It creates it. And when it gets lonely enough, it creates you, again and again and again. You dissolve, not physically, not dramatically. You don't scream or flail or disappear in a puff of light. You simply fade. Your name loses weight. Your memories scatter like ash in water. You try to recall who you are, but the you doing the asking is already slipping away. This is ego death, the complete loss of the sense of self. It happens in altered states, spiritual awakenings, psychotic breaks, and sometimes in the deepest corners of meditation. It is not death in the usual sense, but it feels like dying, because everything you call me collapses, and something else remains. Mainstream fact: ego death is often reported during intense psychedelic experiences, particularly with substances like psilocybin, DMT, or LSD. Users describe it as melting, merging with the universe, or becoming nothing, not in fear, but in overwhelming awe. There is no subject, no object, just awareness. But ego death doesn't require drugs. It can arrive through extreme exhaustion, sensory deprivation, trauma, grief, repetition. For some monks, it's the goal, the final quiet beyond all clinging. For others, it's a terrifying free fall into a void where identity dissolves like sugar in tea. Scientists still argue what ego death actually is. Is it a neurological shutdown of the default mode network, the brain system responsible for stitching together memory, identity, and future planning? Or is it something metaphysical, a glitch in the illusion of self that briefly lets you see the raw code beneath? Either way, it's unforgettable. Quirky tidbit? In one study, participants who experienced ego death showed increased feelings of connectedness afterward, not isolation. They no longer saw themselves as separate from others, but as threads in a larger fabric. The loss of I didn't lead to despair. It led to expansion. But here's the quiet dread. What if the self is always an illusion? What if the you defend, worry about, and narrate in your thoughts is just a helpful fiction, your brain's favorite bedtime story? An ego death is just the moment that story finally ends. Now picture yourself in bed, eyes closed, breathing steady. You're thinking of yourself, your name, your story, your plans for tomorrow. But slowly, one by one, those thoughts drift away. You're not a job. You're not a childhood. You're not even your face. You're just presence. No center, no edge, just now. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't scare you. It's not darkness. It's not light. It's what remains when you stop being. And strangely, softly, you're still there. And now, with all the lights dimmed inside your mind, let yourself stretch softly into stillness. The thoughts will fade, or perhaps they'll linger gently like steam. Let them pass. Let your breath slow, loose, and effortless. You're not here to make sense. You're here to sink. Down into warmth. Down into nothing in particular. No pressure to be. No need to remember. Just a body. Just a breath. Just a little whisper of you, tucked in the dark, between one heartbeat and the next. Sleep now. We've gone far enough. Sweet dreams.